and welcome to Ventures with David. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Sasha Gidwani, an expert and intersection between the payment systems with over a decade working on the financial sector. She is also a distinguished alumna from the MSX program at GSB. Welcome, Sasha.
Thank you for having me, David. It's so great to be here.
It's amazing having you here. I am obsessed with cryptocurrencies, fintech. It's like my new toy. So it's a great moment for having this interview with you.
Yeah, perfect. It's also a space that I'm learning a little bit more about because it's very kind of, different, I would say, from like traditional financial services instruments. So happy to be here and then chat with you about it.
Amazing. Could you tell us a little bit about your trajectory?
Yeah, absolutely. So as David mentioned, I just graduated from Stanford earlier this summer in the MSX program at the Graduate School of Business. But before that, I had over a decade of experience working in banking. So I worked at Bank of America for about 11 years. And I predominantly worked in our transaction banking business. I think recently it's been rebranded to Global Payment Services. But basically, we built any kind of solutions that enterprises needed.
Right.
And it could be anywhere from, a small business all the way up to a multinational corporation. And we built solutions that really helped them manage their money movements.
I see.
So anywhere from, holding their deposits, but also helping them with cross-border payments if they needed to pay a supplier, or helping them receive funding and money from their customers, whether that was a consumer, whether that was another business. So anything that they really needed to kind of manage their money movement.
Awesome. I would like to ask you about, in your experience, there are certain standing challenges. I saw a post on LinkedIn where you were saying that a decade ago, saying that you work on Stripe was not cool, but now everybody, including me, I have to acknowledge, wants to work in those companies.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, related to that, what are the standing challenges of the financial system, and why is Stanford student or anybody should focus on those?
Yeah. So maybe I'll take a little bit of a step back.
All right.
So when I joined, this payments journey that I've been on, it was about 2010. And, Stripe, for example, was brand new. The movement of money was really done by more traditional financial institutions. So banks, or then even companies, like Western Union, for example, if you were trying to make a peer-to-peer payment, or PayPal, example, was like, kind of relatively new at that point. And if you flash forward to today, I'm sure people have kind of heard this phrase that every company is a fintech company.
Right.
And I think what has been done over the last decade or so has been a shift in the customer experience. And so the best way I like to do this is kind of think through an example that a person can kind of relate to. So I lived in Singapore for a couple of years, and I would often have to transfer money between my account in Singapore or my landlord, and my account here in the US.
Right.
And I bank with Bank of America, of course. And, the only way for me to do that at Bank of America was to do it through a wire payment, which is expensive. And at the time, I couldn't actually facilitate that payment online. I actually had to go into a banking center to make that wire. And I was no longer living in the US, so obviously that wasn't an option for me, right? So you think about then, okay, what are the other options? And the company that I ended up using is this fintech company called Wise, where you log on, you kind of create an account, you link your bank accounts, which you can do, from all over the world. And when I go to initiate a transfer, it will tell me how long it's going to take for my money to travel and for me to get to my, end beneficiary. How expensive is it going to be? And how much am I going to pay in this, FX currency rate, for example? So all of that information to me is very clear. Whereas if I was to go from a wire perspective, that financial transaction is very opaque. I don't really know how long it's going to take for it to reach my account. I don't really know how much fees are going to be converted. Yes, you're provided with an FX rate, but somehow you don't exactly always get the exact amount. Right. And so what a company like Wise has done, and a number of different fintechs in the space, is solve for my customer experience perspective. To me, it feels like The money is being transferred much faster. I'm very clear on what's being deducted, and it's through an app on my phone, and it's a very seamless experience. But I think what people miss is that actually in the back end, the financial infrastructure hasn't changed. So Wise is still potentially using wire transfers to, net their accounts across different countries. They still have to hold bank accounts across different countries. So the underlying sort of financial infrastructure hasn't really changed while the consumer experience has changed. So to me, there's like a bit of a question with some of these new technology solutions. Is it enough to just improve the customer experience from a consumer perspective or even from a B2B perspective? Which B2B, I would say even the experience hasn't really been solved for yet. Or is there more work that can be done to actually, fix and update the underlying infrastructure with which how money kind of moves across borders?
It feels this innovation in banking is followed by a feeling of customers feeling tired of opaque transactions.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. And like I said, there have been a lot of fintech solutions, I think, that have come out to fix the consumer experience. So me as an individual, if I'm trying to send money and move money around, or, there's wallet type solutions like Venmo, for example, that make it a bit easier and more seamless. But for companies, a lot of those challenges still haven't been solved. They still have to go to their banking partners. They still have to rely on, process driven, trying to make a payment. So I think that there's still room to improve the experience for businesses as well.
I see. So there is innovation space in the side of the customer experience from one side. But there is something important. You said the customer experience, as you mentioned, has been transformed. The infrastructure below has. Do you think that the banking sector is going to be open to allow these entrepreneurs to transform the landscape?
I think it becomes challenging when we talk specifically about like cross-border payments. I think if you're working within one financial regulatory system, there is more opportunity for a single player to come in and, make changes. But I think when we talk about cross-border and like currency conversions, it becomes much harder because there are currently, outside of SWIFT, which is what wires use, there's no really rails that cross countries. And so that's kind of where I think maybe something like blockchain technology could be interesting. I think it would sort of adds another layer that can be used. I think it still relies on traditional, banking infrastructure that's there. I don't think that that's going away, but I think it's a potential kind of a new way that money can move across borders. It's still something new that I'm kind of, learning. So I'm by no means the expert, but I could see I'm starting to see kind of the value in that.
What is your favorite fintech app?
Oh,
if you have to choose one.
Okay. I definitely think Wise is one of my favorite fintech apps, just because it made like the process so easy for me. And I think it's been a couple of years since I've lived overseas, and so I think that experience has improved even more so. With onboarding, creating an account, getting your bank account to be validated, for example. I think all of that has become faster, and more seamless. But I do think that their original value proposition and the creativity that was used to kind of build solution is very interesting to me.
I see. Now I'm curious about Waze? No. Waze is it?
Well, Waze is the direction. So
okay, got it.
Wise is
Wise.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to get it. You have something special in your CV, which is something that many here at Stanford MSNE Management Science want, which is your experience in product management and banking. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say there's a couple of different ways to look and think about product management, but at the core, I would say you are a product owner. You are kind of, if we think about kind of like a hub and spoke sort of model, you're the hub. You are the central person that kind of pulls everything together. And I think that that's like a very important aspect of product management. You're not responsible for just one thing. You're responsible for bringing in other people on this journey. So I'll give you a little bit more concrete kind of an example, but let's say you're working on a product in you're a product manager at a fintech. You might one day be responsible for, working with like the business leaders, for example, or working with your customers and your sales teams to understand the voice of the customer, to understand what are the, challenges that your customer is actually facing, and gather those kind of like requirements and documentation, and then work with engineers to actually build and deliver a solution. So that's kind of, I would say, like a little bit more on the technical aspect, where you might have to be working with engineering teams and figuring out, your product scope and documenting requirements and figuring out like, okay, when can we actually deliver this and where does it fit into our product roadmap? That might be one aspect. Another aspect might be if you're working in fintech, obviously there's going to be this regulatory compliance kind of aspect. So another aspect of that might be, okay, we need to work with our compliance partners to make sure that our client asked us for this, but is this something, that we can kind of deliver within our realm? Is this responsible for us to deliver? It could be working with marketing. We've launched a feature already. How do we get this out there in front of our customers or in front of new customers? It could be product strategy. How do we kind of grow? What other customer segments might be interested in using this kind of product? So I think the core thing as a product manager is that you kind of like the center of the product and the owner. And it can be technical, it can be business related, it can be risk related, it can be client facing, but there's so many different aspects to managing a product, and you're kind of the person that's driving all of those initiatives, I would say.
I'm asking this question frequently, is siloed work. Organizations, some people tend to work isolated.
Yeah.
It seems to be that the product manager needs to bring people, as you mentioned,
yes.
journey.
Yes.
How you defeat those silos?
Yeah, that's a good question and a very important aspect, because a lot of your job as a PM is like stakeholder management and cross-functional collaboration. I think one of the things that has worked for me is I have been able to work in different functions. I've worked in a client-facing role, so I kind of empathize and understand with salespeople, for example. I've worked in a risk management role, so I understand the need for compliance and having a risk hat on. I've worked in a product, like pure kind of product management role, so I understand from a business perspective, this is what our leaders need. And I think when you are working across so many people that sometimes have very different priorities, and so many different stakeholders, it can be very tough to manage that. But I've always kind of relied on putting myself in their shoes and trying to understand what drives them, what motivates them, what are they trying to achieve, and how can I help them get there? And how can we find a kind of joint goal together? It's difficult because it's people, at the end of the day. And so product management is as much of a people job, as it is of a engineering or technical expertise job. I really believe that you need to be able to kind of connect with these different stakeholders and different groups. And the best way to do that is like just to develop some empathy or spend time with those teams and really, build deep relationships so that they trust you. So that's important.
Will you say that sine qua non trait, something that product manager could not be successful, is the fact that it needs to have this diverse set of experiences? For example, you, as you mentioned, you had client-facing experience, went on the back end, then you went in, working several teams. Would you say that diverse experience is necessary?
I wouldn't say it's necessary. I would say that's just been part of my career journey, and that is what's helped me. But I think what is necessary is spending time to build those relationships and building empathy with all of the different stakeholders that you're working with. I think that is necessary. But how to do that? There's many different ways, I think so. But for me, it helped spending time in each of these different functions. And it makes me more relatable,
Of course.
Yeah. So,
3 skills or traits that students here should cultivate in Stanford, or if they're in Harvard, whatever, what they should focus on to be good product managers.
Okay, that is a great question. And I think that Stanford is a fantastic place to cultivate some of these skills. Number one, I would say communication. Your ability to communicate across different experiences, different cultures. I think Stanford is a very multicultural institution, so you naturally get that. But Being able to speak up, speak down, speak to engineering language, speak a sales language, being able to kind of adapt your communication style to who you're speaking with. That is a very important skill, I think. While I was here, I got a little exposure to design thinking at the D School, which that was kind of a new sort of product lens that I hadn't really been exposed to in my career. And I think it's absolutely fascinating. And I think it's really interesting because it really puts the user first. You're, again, trying to develop empathy. You're really spending time to understand, what is the problem that this user is facing or this customer is facing. You're not coming to it from a perspective of, I have a solution and I want to build the solution and I want to sell the solution. It's more, who am I building this for? And you work with them in a sense to develop something that works for them. I remember there was a quote or something that I heard during my time here where I think it was like Henry Ford said that, if I asked man at that time, what do they want? They would have said they wanted a faster horse. They wouldn't have said that they wanted a car because that car didn't exist, right? And if you think about a lot of the new sort of tech innovations that have happened over the last decade or so, maybe we didn't need an iPhone, and maybe that would have never been invented if Steve Jobs was trying to build something that he wanted to build, So I think that, it's important to kind of put the user first. And if you get an opportunity to take any classes at the D School and learn the design thinking approach, I think that's really valuable. And I think the third, I don't know if it's necessarily a skill, but I do think it's an important trait to be a product manager, is to be really curious and be really detail oriented. Especially when you're working in the tech world and in a fintech organization, there can be very small things, very detail-oriented things, whether it's related to compliance, whether it's related to, the payment system architecture. And it's important to kind of have that inner curiosity and ask questions and really try and get into the weeds to develop and build really good solutions. So I would say that those are the three kind of important traits, maybe.
Super useful.
Yeah.
So I would like to ask you a semi-final question.
Go for it.
So I often have been faced with the situation where engineers, I'm an engineer, I have the same problem, I confess. We jump directly to the problem. Mm-hmm. We don't think on the previous steps you were mentioning. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you face that situation. What do you do to help people from diverse set of backgrounds have this mindset of design thinking?
Yeah, I think that is very tough. And I think a lot of that comes kind of top down, depending on the founder or the CEO, what their ethos is. So you'll hear sometimes, a tech company is a very product driven organization, right? So that means kind of that maybe the CEO of the founder is a product manager. They really understand user journeys. They really understand, user experiences, their problems and developing beautiful solutions. Sometimes you kind of hear that, right? And sometimes you have, founders or CEOs that are more business oriented people or they're more sales oriented people. And so that's kind of what drives the company. So I think as a PM, there's no kind of one size fits all. A PM job can be very different from, at different companies. So I think it's important for you to spend time at understanding what is driving the company, what is the motivation, and what is the culture. Because it's going to be tough if you're in an organization that is not a user-driven organization to make a change and to get everybody on board. I would say that, coming from a traditional finance institution, we tried to have the user in mind, our corporate customer in mind, but it was very difficult because we're working against regulatory requirements, for example, or we've got funding for a project, we have to get it done. We don't have time to figure out if our customer really wants that or not. So I think it can be very challenging if that is your ethos or that is something that you want and you're in an organization that doesn't have that, and to change everybody is tough. So I think it's important to spend time to understand, what is the culture of the organization? And is that something that you mesh with and that you get along with? And it's, what drives you?
I see. So basically, it depends a lot on the management style, the sector, the pressures and incentives that the organization has.
Exactly. I really do believe that.
I would like to ask you a final question, which is, I know you care about women's leadership. And I want to ask you how, in your experience, we can design better organizations to empower women and to bridge that inequality gap that is present in product management. Right? It's incredible. Right?
Yeah, I was surprised. I felt that even in Silicon Valley, there was quite a big, gap, I would say. It's a difficult question, to be honest, because I don't know, what the answer is for that. I would say from my perspective, some of the things that I've kind of struggled with is having women that look like me in senior levels, because without that, it's very hard for me to imagine being in that kind of a position. So it's not about, creating these D&I groups. Yes, those are great. It's not about, hiring a woman over a man if they're equal. It's not about those kind of thing, but it's about just giving kind of, I think, equal opportunity for both. And I think the challenge, I can speak, from my own perspective. So my program, the MSX program, is a mid-career MBA program where people generally have 10, 12 years of experience before coming back to school. And the MBA program is much younger. They usually have like 4 to 5 years of experience. So you can kind of think of the MBA program as like roughly their late 20s. The MSX program is roughly their late 30s. So there's about a decade of a gap between the two. And the MBA program is about 50% men, 50% women. And the MSX program is 30% women, 70% men. So it's very
it's like
illustrative. Yeah, it's very illustrative of, I would say, even what my working experience has been like. At a junior level, there's a lot of women. But as you kind of get older, as women start families, like it becomes a bit more challenging. And so I think, this kind of culture that we've had after COVID with hybrid working, like gives a lot more flexibility to mothers, for example, and gives them an opportunity to stay in the workforce longer or to be more, ambitious because they can have this flexibility to take care of kids. And I know that that's very kind of stereotypical, but, I think things like that as they change, like as we kind of go on in time will help, have women kind of be more ambitious and step more into kind of leadership roles. But it's a difficult question. I don't know.
It's a tough one.
Have the right answer.
And I think you responded perfectly. I feel that when you have reference in management, that look like you, you can follow that path. But one, you say something that is super interesting, comparing the numbers of the MPA and MSX. Something is happening that many talented women are not moving up.
Exactly.
And they have to push those levels.
Yeah. And I think I just wanted to add, this representation thing, I don't think it's necessarily just a women thing. I think it's people of color. It's anybody who's diverse and different, like if we don't see people who look like us at the top, it's very hard to imagine that we can make it there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I would say like there, you can see a little bit of the change. It's very slow, but it's happening. And I just think it will take time.
I want to thank you so much for this time.
No, thank you.
You have all the qualities that the GSB class.
I'm so happy to be here and share my experience.
And I hope to ask you more questions once you are. I know you're going for Fintech.
Yes, that's the plan.
So we have to plan another interview.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Sasha.
For having me, David.
Absolutely.